bottom of page 163. She did not hear the airplane, she saw it. The low sun of noon struck its aluminum body, and it sparkled like a star in the sky. It was a small plane, the type brush pilots used to carry people over the roadless tundra and across the rugged mountains of Alaska where cars cannot go. Presently, its sound rushed her ears, and the throb of the engines reminded her that this was the beginning of the season when bush pilots took the gussets out to hunt. The craft tipped its wings and zigzagged across the sky. When it continued to zag, she realized the pilot was following a meandering river where game wintered. A river, she thought. Rivers lead to the sea. I am nearing the end of my journey. Point Hope might be but one sleep away. She quickened her pace. The airplane banked, turned, and came toward her. It seemed as big as an eagle as it skimmed low over the ground. Bright flashes of fire burst from its side. They are hunting, she said to turn it. Let's get the oil drum. I look like a bear in these clothes. Just before she reached the drum, she crossed the footsteps of Armrock and Kapu. They had passed this way only moments ago, for the snow crystals their warm feet had melted were not yet frozen yet. The plane continued to come toward her. Apparently, she had been seen. She kicked snow over her sled and pack and crawled to the front of the barrel. It was sealed. She could not get inside. Scurrying to the other end, she found that it too was closed. Desperately, she threw herself under the curve of the drum and lay still. Much of her was still exposed. Flailing her hands and feet, she stirred up the light snow. It arose like a cloud and settled upon her as the plane soared above. Shy, and Myax opened her eyes. She was still alive, and the air hunters were over the river. The plane banked and flew back, this time very low. Turnit struggled. Be still, she said. The gunfire snapped again, and eyes wide open, she saw that it was not aimed at her. Armorak! Horrified, she watched him leap in the air as a splatter of shots burst beside him. Digging in his claws, he veered to the right and left as Kapu ran to join him. Teeth bared, angrily growling, Armorak told him to go. Kapu sped off. The plane hesitated, then pursued Armorak. Shots hit the snow in front of him. He reared and turned. Armorak, she screamed. Here, come here. The plane swerved, dove, and skimmed about 30 feet above the ground. Its guns blasted. Armorak stumbled, pressed back his ears, and galloped across the tundra like a shooting star. Then he reared and dropped in the snow. He was dead. For a bounty, she screamed. For money, the magnificent Armorak is dead. Her throat constricted with grief, and sobs choked her. The plane banked and came back. Kapu was running to Armorak. His ears were pressed to his head, and his legs moved so swiftly they were a blur. Bullets showered the snow around him. He leaped, dodged, and headed for the oil drum. His wide eyes were an open mouth, told Myax he was afraid for the first time in his life. Blindly he ran, and as he came by, she reached out and tripped him. He sprawled across the snow and lay still. While the plane coasted off to make another turn, she covered Kapu with flakes. The snow turned red with blood from his shoulder. Myax rolled under the barrel. The air exploded, and she stared up to the belly of the plane. Bolts, doors, wheels, red, white, silver, and black, the plane flashed before her eyes. In that instant, she saw great cities, bridges, radios, school books. She saw the pink room, long highways, TV sets, telephones, and electric lights. Black exhaust enveloped her, and civilization became this monster that snarled across the sky. The plane shrank before her eyes, then turned and grew big again. Turnit flew to the top of the barrel, screaming his alarm cry and beating his wings. Kapu tried to get up. Don't move, Myax whispered. They're coming for Armorak. Knowing Kapu did not understand, she reached out and softly stroked him, singing, Lie still, lie still. She watched him slump back in the snow without a sound. The plane returned at so low a level she could see the men in the cockpit, their coat collars pulled up around their necks, their crash helmets and goggles gleaming. They were laughing and watching the ground. Desperately, Myax thought about Silver, Nails, and the pups. Where were they? They must be clear targets in the white snow. Maybe not. They were light in color, not black. Suddenly, the engine accelerated, the wing flaps pressed down, and the craft climbed, banked, and sailed down the river like a migrating bird. It did not turn around. Mayax buried her fingers in Capu's fur. They did not even stop to get him, she cried. They did not even kill him for money. I don't understand. I don't understand. Tavanga vanga, she cried. Pispa gaska punga. She spoke of her sadness in Eskimo, for she could not recall any English. Capu's blood spread like fish ripples on the snow. She wriggled to him and clamped her thumb on the vein that was gushing. She held the pressure, a minute, an hour, she did not know how long. Then Turnit cried hungrily. Cautiously, she lifted her hand. The bleeding had stopped. Tagasu, she said to Capu. She brushed the snow off her sled and took out her poles. She set up her tent beside the barrel, banked the snow around the bottom to seal out the wind, and spread her ground cloth under it. When she tried to push Capu into the shelter, she found him too heavy. He lifted his head, then dropped it wearily. Mayax decided to build the tent around him. She took everything down and started all over again. This time, she eased the ground skin under him inch by inch until he lay on the fur. Then she kicked the oil drum to free it from the ice, rolled it close to him, and erected her tent against it. She sealed the gaps with snow. The drum was old, for it had different markings than those around Barrow. But like them, it was barely rusted. The frigid winters and the dry, desert-like conditions of the tundra prevent metals, papers, garbage, and refuge from deteriorating as it does in warmer zones. In the Arctic, all artifacts are preserved for ages. Even throwing them in the oceans does not work a change, for the water freezes around them and the ice flows. They come back in the shores. The summer sun unveils them again. Mayax melted snow, cut off meat for Turnit, and fed him. He flew down the barrel and ran into the tent. Hopping into her furry sleeping skin, he puffed his feathers, stood on one foot, and went to sleep. With the stew bubbling, Capu resting, and Turnit asleep, Mayax dared to think of Armorak. She would go and bid him goodbye. She tried to get up, but she could not move. Grief held her in a vise-like clamp. About an hour later, Capu lifted his head, rolled his eyes around the cozy interior of the tent, and accepted chunks of stew. Mayax petted his head and told him in Eskimo to lie still while she looked at his wound. It was long and deep, and she knew it must be sewn together. Taking a piece of sinew from the ground skin, she threaded it into her needle and pierced the soft flesh. Capu growled. Xlur paju sexo, she sang soothingly. Luper paju siv siri vengo pamagran mejo riva penman. Monotonously repeating over and over the healing song of the old bent lady, she hypnotized Capu as she closed the wound. The precipitation was running down her cheek when she was done, but she was able to tell him that he would get well and return to lead their pack. The sun set in the navy blue sky, and the stars sparkled on and off as they spoke of their vast distances from the earth. Around midnight, the inside of the tent began to glow green, and Capu's eyes shone like emeralds. Mayax peered out the flap door. Fountains of green fire rose from the earth and shot to the top of the black velvet sky. Red and white lights sprayed out of the green. The northern lights were dancing. The lake boomed, and Nails howled mournfully beyond the tent. Mayax howled to tell him where she was. Then Silver barked and the pups called. Each voice sounded closer than the last. The pack was coming toward the oil drum as they searched for Armorak and Capu. Mayax stepped into the light of the aurora. It was time to bid Armorak farewell. She tried to go forward, but her feet would not move. Grief still held her useless. Clutching her left knee in both hands, she lifted her foot and put it down. Then she lifted the other and put it down, slowly making her way across the turquoise snow. Armorak lay where he had fallen, his fur shining in the strange magnetic light. Armorak. She took her carving from her pocket, then got down to her knees. Singing softly in Eskimo, she told him she had no bladder for his spirit to dwell in, but that she had his totem. She asked him to enter the totem and be with her forever. For a long time, she held the carving over his body. Presently, the pain in her breast grew lighter as she knew the wolf was with her. The stars had slipped down the sky, then at last she stood up and walked softly back to Capu. All night, Max sat beside him and listened to Silver, Nails, and the pups. Ow, 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 they cried in a tone she'd never heard before, and she knew they were crying for Armorak. The sun went down on November 10th, not to arise again for 66 days. In the darkness, Kapu got up to exercise by walking out of the tundra and back. Turnit was not so comfortable in the continuous night. He slept in Mayax's fur most of the time, waiting for the dawn. When it did not come, hunger awoke him. He ran from his roost to Mayax, pecked on her boot, and fluttered his wings for food. Then the darkness would say to him, "Sleep," and he would run back to his roost, pull his feet into his breast feathers, and close his eyes. For her part, Mayax found the clear nights quite manageable. She could hunt caribou chips by star and moonlight, cook outside, and even sew. When the sky was overcast, however, the tundra was black, and she would stay inside, light her candle, and talk to Kapu and Turnit. At these times, she began to shape the antler weapon into a more elaborate design. As she worked, she saw 5 puppies in it. Carefully, she carved out their ears and toes until they were running in a single file, Kapu in the lead. She grew tired, took out Armorak's totem, and thought about his life and brave spirit. "The pink room is red with your blood," she said. "I cannot go there, but where can I go? Not back to Barrow and Daniel, but back to Nunavik and Martha. And you cannot take care of me anymore." Snowstorms came and went. The wind blew constantly. One starry night, Mayax heard a whimper and opened her tent flap to see Silver at the door. She had a large hair in her mouth, and although Mayax was glad for food, she was distressed to realize that her pack was not eating well. Disorganized without Armorak, they were forced to hunt rabbits and small game. These would not sustain them. Mayax reached out, petted Silver on the shoulder, and felt her bony back. Without a leader, the pack would not live through the winter. Silver nudged her hand. Mayax opened the flap wider, and the beautiful wolf came in. She dropped the rabbit and walked over to Kapu. He got to his feet and, arching his neck, lifted his head above hers. She greeted him, wagging her tail excitedly. Then she tried to bite the top of his nose to tell him she was the leader, but Kapu drew up tall. Gently, he took her nose in his mouth. She bit him under the chin, hailing the new chief. Kapu pushed past her and slipped out of the tent. Silver followed the prince of the wolves. In the darkness, he sang of his leadership, but, too weak to run, turned wearily back to the tent. A new grandeur attended his movements as he came through the door, and Mayax squeezed his chin. He lay down and watched her skin the rabbit. She gave him the flesh and went out to hunt lemmings for herself. Since the end of summer, the little rodents had doubled, tripled, even quadrupled their numbers. By following their runways, she found 7 nests and caught 80 furred young. She skinned and cooked them and found them delicious. The next night, Silver brought her a part of a moose. She had not killed it, for it was old and frozen. Mayax knew she had been done to the river. No moose wandered the tundra. Several sleeps later, Kapu ran over the snow without stumbling, and Mayax decided it was time to move to the river. Game would be more abundant in the dwarf willows that bordered the waterways. There, rabbits and ptarmigan gathered to eat seeds out of the wind, and moose wintered on the twigs of the willows. Perhaps Silver and Nails would find a sick yearling, and with help from the pups be able to kill it. Life would be kinder there. She packed, put Turnit in her parka hood, and, picking up her sled ropes, set off once more. Kapu limped as she walked beside her, but less and less as they plodded along. The exercise seemed to help him, and by the end of the night, he was running 50 steps to her 1. Often he took her hand and mouthed it affectionately. The river would not be hard to find, for she had marked its position by the faithful North Star, and so, hours later, as the constellation of the hunter moved to the other side of her, she reached the brushy bank. In the distance loomed the massive walls of the Brooks Range, the massive mountains that rimmed the north slope to the south. Her journey was coming to an end. The rivers that flow out of the Brooks Range are close to the sea. After making camp, Mayax and Kapu went out to snare ptarmigan and rabbits. Silver called from a short distance away, and they answered her. Hours later, when Mayax crawled into her sleeping skin, the wolves were so near that she could hear the pups scratching the snow as they made their beds. As she had anticipated, the hunting was excellent, and upon checking her snars the next day, she found 3 rabbits and 2 ptarmigan. For several days she was busy skinning and cooking.